the way.
Yeah.
And good morning. Welcome to B Cube Sunday morning, or as we call this episode, Sunday Brunch. We have with us people, 2 out of 3 people, or actually 3 out of 4 here, were in our very first B Cube book we ever did. Phyllis Irene Radford, Karen G. Anderson, and also with us is Brenda Clough. Now, before we turn the show over to them, I want to remind all of you guys that BQ Press has a new release edited by Karen G. Anderson, KG Anderson, and containing some wonderful stories and a cover design that she is very proud of because people are liking it. And so that's Southern Truths, and it's got some incredible work in it. If you like Adam Troy Castro, if you like Jim Wright, if you like David Gerald, who gave us a title I never thought I'd see out of David. What's the title of his story, Karen?
The Trouble with Dribbles.
I love it.
Yes, it's worth reading the book just for that. But also Larry Hodges' brilliant story about a black man raring to vote in Texas and the troubles he has doing it. Bless his heart. It is just brilliant. So the whole damn book is brilliant. Karen did a good job picking out stories. And, well, we did it together. I'm going to steal some.
Which was what made it fun.
Yes, it's a great book. And following up with that, election night, Tuesday night, Karen and I and Cliff Winning are going to be hosting B Cube Press's election night event. And we have with us Jim Wright, David, don't know about David, Jim Wright and Adam Troy Castro are joining us, along with a few other guests we're going to have rotating through. And we are just thrilled to death because while today we're not going to talk politics, we're going to remind you, if you haven't got your ballot mailed, get it mailed, because there are evil forces afoot right now trying to say that if your ballot shows up on the day after election, the Republicans are trying to have those ballots thrown out. And with the Supreme Court that they have, they could get it. So get your ballots in early. That said, I now am going to push my little button that makes me go away and let Karen and Brenda and the wonderful Irene Radford have the show.
Okay, Bob, before you sign off, stand up and show off your T-shirt.
Okay.
Bigfoot believe.
Nice.
I live in Bigfoot country. I am a big fan of Bigfoot.
When I do my Bigfoot impression, the dogs get excited.
Yeah.
Phil gave me this shirt a long time ago. We were working on our books together down in Oregon, and it was a fun time. But thank you, Phil, for everything. Thank you for writing all those books, because you've been a treasure to people when you do it. One quick little point. When I introduced Phil to my family I have living down in Oregon, turns out that my nephew was married, wife, said, literally squealed when I mentioned I was down to see Irene, and was just a super fan. And so when I was able to take Irene over and have take her shooting with us, yes, we took Irene shooting. And,
I'm not a great shot, but I know my way around a firearm.
She did a fine job. She's better at it than I am. Take care now. Y'all enjoy.
Okay, where do we start?
Well, the proximate cause for this event is the publication of your 50th book. I calculate that if that's actually, I'm not good at math, but if you had 50 books and we're going to calculate that each novel is about 100,000 words for ease and calculation, that gets us to, what's 50 times? I have to find a pencil.
5 million.
5 million words, really? That
Mhm.
is a really, really impressive number of wordages.
Mhm.
I cannot, and that clearly is a number larger than one a year, since you have not yet hit your 200th birthday.
Right. 30 years.
Oh my
It
God.
was, I think December 4th is the actual anniversary of the release of
Mhm.
The Glass Dragon.
Right, the first one.
The very first one. Heart and soul.
And this came from Daw Books, right?
Right.
Was that during the period when Donald Walheim was doing it, or were you dealing with mainly with Betsy and Sheila?
Yeah, it was Betsy and Sheila. Donald had passed just a few years before, and Elsie passed
Right.
just a year or two after I came on board. I actually got to talk to Elsie Walheim a couple of times when I called
Mm-hmm.
called
Yeah,
in.
they were titans of the industry, the two of them. But
Yeah.
you got on at a good moment with Daw.
Right. And it was at a time when dragons and swords and sorceries really ruled
Right.
the SF&F world.
The
And
fantasy world, yeah.
right. And I'm on my third or fourth generation of readers.
Mhm.
I recently got the rights back for almost everything that I published through DAW, and I've re-released them through the Bookview Cafe. And I've had people go on Facebook and show me pictures of their children reading my new editions, and them remembering the first time they got to read, which was, well, like 20 years ago instead of 30. So I'm on at least my third generation of readers, and I think the best piece of fan mail I ever got was from a girl. She was about 12 at the time, and it was write a business letter in your English class, kind of a situation. And she started it out, I hate to read,
Mhm.
but my friend gave me a copy of The Glass Dragon because the dragon spells her name the same way I spell my name. I loved it, and I can't wait for the next one.
Oh,
If,
that is charming.
if I do nothing else in my career, I've been a success because I turned a non-reader into a reader.
Phil, I want you to go back and tell us a little bit before we start with all the publishing. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up, and did you grow up in an environment that made you really want to be a writer, or was it kind of defying an environment? What was your childhood like?
My dad was an officer in the Coast Guard. He had been Navy, Merchant Marine, and by the time I came along, fourth child, Merchant Marine had no real benefits. Coast Guard offered him a job with military benefits, meaning health insurance, and a retirement plan. And so I was born in Portland, but we only lived here 5 weeks before we moved to Seattle. And then we moved to Maine. And then we moved to Bethesda, Maryland. And then we moved to Little Creek, Virginia. And then my dad retired from this military and went private. And we moved back to the Portland area and at that point, all I really wanted was 2 years in the same school.
I know this one so well. I'm a foreign service brat, and I did a calculation once that we moved every 9 months, just averaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're used to that, but I do believe that if you are in the military or government services, or your father is, there's no better training for a fantasy or science fiction writer, because you're always going to a new world, and there are places you can go to on this planet if you only had the airplane ticket that are as good as the surface of Mars. and it is as good as you're ever going to get, but until we have space colonies.
Yeah. And the transition from Virginia,
Right.
which, granted, Little Creek, Norfolk, Portsmouth were Navy towns, but
Mhm.
there's still that element of, oh God, and this from Southern Truths, of the politeness, the very gentle mask of sarcasm. And you always wore a hat and gloves to church.
Mhm.
That kind of society. And well, 5 years in that area, but different houses every year, because for some reason my parents rented rather than buying. And then to move to Tigard, Oregon, which at the time was just barely a suburb of Portland. I think they had population of around 2,800 at the time. And that small town, semi-rural atmosphere where jeans ruled.
Mhm.
And I come from the hat and gloves society. It was not comfortable. My last 2 years of high school, let's put it that way. And then I went to Lewis and Clark College, where
Mhm.
I was far enough away from home that I could live in the dorm, but I could still go home on weekends if I chose. And I I'd always been in love with Britain. Don't ask me why.
Mhm.
I now realize it's hardwired in my brain because I'm 53% Celtic.
Mhm.
Thank you, 23andMe. Um, but I was a history major. I loved British history,
Mhm.
except for the War of the Roses. I can recite the Kings of England going back to Edward the Confessor. But anyway, through Lewis and Clark, I did their overseas study program to Britain. And granted, it was a poli-sci professor who took us, so we were studying their way of government.
Mhm.
Um, but I was approaching it from looking for the historical change, the evolution to that form of government. Um, and I met my husband doing an off campus production of Brigadoon.
Oh, I love it.
Very
That's so
romantic.
Uh,
romantic.
yeah, I took up ballet like in second grade, primarily because I pronated my feet. They turned in, and then I got addicted. And it was as we moved, a ballet studio became an introduction to the community, so I could make friends through ballet and ignore the bullies at school. Um, so anyway, I was a trained dancer. He had taken Highland dancing classes and played the bagpipes. And so it was just natural that he become Harry Beaton because he was the only adult male in town who could do the sword dance at the time. And I was a trained ballet dancer, had done theater off and on in high school and college. And so that's where we met. And I became a Highland Games groupie. And we've been married, be 54 years this month.
Wow.
Yeah, Thanksgiving Day. We got married on Thanksgiving Day because it was the day after my last final at Lewis and Clark.
I have to guess that your husband is immensely supportive of your writing.
He is and he isn't. He's enough neurodivergent that he kind of resents the time that I spend alone with my computer. But at the same time, he realizes that the money I make, which is not as much as it used to be, fills in the gaps of his job or jobs. And also, I will willingly take day trips with him if it's a place I need to research as a landscape for my next book.
Mhm.
I've been trying to get back to Leavenworth, Washington for a year and a half. Because I want to go to the Nutcracker Museum there. I'm working on my next cozy mystery, which involves the Nutcracker Ballet. And I have nutcrackers all over the Whistling River Lodge.
You know that I have a niece who is a conductor with the Boston Ballet, and her main role in life at this time of year is to help conduct the Nutcracker 2 performances a day. So if you need something from that end, we have someone we could consult.
Yeah. I belonged to the Ballet du Lac, which was based in Lake Oswego. It was the studio where I danced after we moved back out here. And we formed our own amateur ballet company. And by the time I was too pregnant to dance, we were pro-am. We hired professionals out of New York to do the starring roles of our Nutcracker. But one year I did 11 performances in 14 days with bronchitis, a 6-month-old baby who was teething. We were living with my parents because we'd lost the lease on our rental and awaiting closing on the house we were going to buy.
Whoa.
And I had bronchitis.
So, Phil, you're talking about mysteries. We started out with dragons, fantasy. How many different subgenres have you written in?
Well, there's 50 books. And there's only so many ways you can describe those friggin' dragons. So there's actually 13 dragon books. I still have 6 to reprint. Brenda, if you're willing to do beta reads. I've done contemporary fantasy. I've done the cozy mysteries, which have hints of ghosts, but no real paranormal activity. I've done historical fantasy, both in the Merlin's Descendants series and the Walk the Wild and Outlaws of the Wildwood. What else? I'm doing final stages of production on A Weird West. That will be out at the end of March. That was just something that came out of nowhere. But you know, Maya Bonhoff just did my final proofread, and I figure, okay, that's end of March. I can give her to like the 1st of February to read it. She had it back to me in 2 days.
Oh, how wonderful!
You know, and so now I'm working through it again with her notes, and I don't anticipate adding 5,000 words like I did after Jill Zeller read it. But it's just my brain won't sit still.
You are prolific.
That's a wonderful motto. My brain won't sit still.
Yeah. You know, and if I watch a television show, if we go for a hike, and well, one of my favorite stories, I was just starting to write Guardian of the Trust. The second of the Merlin books. This is the original cover, by the way. And I was stalled at about 80 pages, and I couldn't figure it out why. So husband kidnaps me for a day trip, which he does often enough. We drove to Central Oregon, 300 miles and like $300 worth of collectible beer steins later. We're on the final stretch home, coming down Laurel Hill off of Mount Hood, and this is a 60% grade, you know, so it's steep, and they used to take wagon trains down it, and the mist was boiling up out of the valley, and I kept thinking, you know, what would be hiding in that mist? And it struck me, 80 pages in, and my heroine is already manipulating the villain. He's not the villain. Somebody hiding in the mist is the villain.
Complication.
You know, my mind explodes with possibilities. and it took me about 3 weeks to add another 150 pages to the original 80, to get it back on track.
Mhm.
But that's just kind of the way things work with me.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not a one draft writer. Having a second, third, and usually a fourth draft is a luxury that I exploit. My creativity comes in layers, and each book, every draft expands, because I've written the bare skeleton,
Mhm.
and then I have to add a few organs, and then the skin, and then the clothing, and then the stage lights, kind of a
Mhm.
thing. Um, so it's a process, and I generally have more than one project going because of that layering process, and I have to let a book simmer between two drafts.
Phil, you're talking about process. Talk about, do you have a critique group? Do you use beta readers? What is the life cycle of one of your books?
Okay.
Mhm.
I've outgrown several critique groups,
Mhm.
but I started with one, and I have to credit them with a lot of my success. They taught me how to write. And it's not just putting words down on paper. It's
Mhm.
knowing where the commas go, choosing the proper vocabulary, expanding my vocabulary, um, knowing when that I can add elements of spirituality, and where they don't belong. They don't belong in the middle of a battle scene. Believe me, that comes afterwards.
Mhm.
Um, so, but and I continually wrote faster than my critique groups could keep up.
Mhm.
We'd meet every 2 weeks and bring 10 pages. By the time I got their critique back, I was 100 pages beyond them.
Mhm.
Um, so I began going not in the middle of, I wait until I finish a draft before I'd let it go out to one critiquer. And then it would go out to a different one on the second draft. And I still pretty much do that. I will brainstorm spot research as I go,
Mhm.
but the full complete thing doesn't go out to a beta reader until it is a thing.
More or less done.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it needs tweaking. It needs filling in. It
Mhm.
needs more tweaking.
Mhm.
It needs a name change.
Mhm.
I don't know. What was it? The Pixie books. Um, this is Dandelion Twist. This is the third Pixie book.
Mhm.
But anyway, the secondary hero's name was Benedict. That his mother named both he and his sister after Shakespeare characters. She was Desdemona and he was Benedict, and they hated it.
Ah, ha, ha, ha.
So she became Dusty, and he became Dick. And as I rewrote the book, revised it for the reissue through Bookview Cafe, everybody came back and says, he's a dick. Don't name him that. And Benedict is kind of a cool name now, where 30 years ago it wasn't. So, I change names. I change
Mhm.
titles. I have not changed location. Because location is a big part of the writing process for me.
Mhm.
I wrote off an entire trip to Great Britain for the Merlin books,
Mhm.
you know, and I have pictures of, the port above Portsmouth in southern England,
Mhm.
where you have a Roman wall.
Mhm.
Um, the church inside the castle, or the town as it was, has 10th century crypt.
Mhm.
The castle ruins are 12th century, and that church is still in use.
Mhm.
And we were there like um, Good Friday or whatever, and the altar guild was working in the church with flowers and whatnot. And so it was really great to see the continuity of many of 2,000 years, basically. And so that gave me a sense of place to put into my books, because each one is a different generation moving through history. I start with King Arthur and Merlin's daughter, and she has a very strange relationship with both her dad and King Arthur. Then we moved to Guardian of the Trust, which was Magna Carta era, and I have seen copies of the Magna Carta. Moving up to Guardian of the Vision, which is early Elizabethan, and then 200,000 words, and I was killing off my first person hero, and I'd only covered 5 years of time. Elizabeth reigned for a long time, so I had to do Guardian of the Promise with the children of Guardian of the Trust. And then I finally wound it up with Guardian of the Freedom, which is moving the family to the New World. And so that sense of place and of multi-generations and continuity really gelled for me when I did that trip in Britain. And
isn't one international travel is just wonderful for this kind of thing?
Oh, yes. And then when I was doing the test books, I got to go to Las Vegas and see Cirque du Soleil in person. Because like I said, it's that sense of place. And I hope that's what draws readers back to me. And the Cozy Mysteries are set up here on Mount Hood. And it's kind of a compilation of many locations. There is no Whistling River or Whistling River Golf Resort and Lodge, but it's very similar to many things that are up here on the mountain. And I think I had a Sasquatch sighting in one of the books, they live in my backyard, so why not? And that's why I had Bob show off his T-shirt.
Bill, what was your first book set in the Pacific Northwest?
Actually, real time set in the Pacific Northwest. It was where is it? The first Cozy Mystery, Whistling Down the Wind, which had been incarnations before that I settled on that title. And if anybody asks, it's very similar to the Mount Hood Golf Resort, but it's got a McMinimans Hotel on it. And the Whistling River is sort of the Salmon River, but not really, kind of a thing. And before that, the first of the test books, which would be Hounding the Moon, she goes to Powell's Books, which I call something different, in downtown Portland, and later she moves to the Pacific Northwest from Cape Cod, and the house in Cape Cod is based upon where my then agent lived in Cape Cod. I actually, drew a blueprint of her house. Like I said, sense of place is very important.
What year did that come out?
Which one? Hounding the Moon?
No, the first Cozy.
The first Cozy.
Just roughly.
Okay. Whistle Down the Wind. Okay, here they are. Here's the cover. That's a Maya Bonhoff cover, by the way. In 2019, it came out from the Bookview Cafe, but prior to that, it was called Lacing Up for Murder from Sky Warrior Books in 2012.
Okay.
I have since severed connections to Sky Warrior, and got rights back to the few things I had published with them.
Question for you. You talked about that cover. Talk about some of the cover artists who have illustrated your books. Daw is famous for its fantasy covers. So
Oh,
who have
yeah.
you gotten to work
Oh,
with?
they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, they're gorgeous.
You know, John Howe was the artist for this book.
Mhm.
You know, and he's got,
That's beautiful.
that translucent dragon, which is so important
Mhm.
to the entire series.
Mhm.
And he did 4 covers for me before he went off to New Zealand without telling anybody and did the background paintings for that piddly little movie that cost $600 million.
Mhm.
And he's used some of my dragons on his calendars, but I mean, he did the artwork. He's got the copyright. And then I got Louis Royho.
Mhm.
This
Oh,
is
that's the one I've seen.
And he does not speak English very well. But he was at a Norwescon as the artist guest of honor. And I had cover flats that I asked him to sign for me. And his signature evolves into the outline of a dragon on the cover flats that he signed for me, which are archived now with the University of Kansas. But anyway, he just kept saying all the time he was signing, he's more dragons, write more dragons. I love dragons. So, and I had one loser cover, the Renegade Dragon. This was when John Howe had decamped to New Zealand without notice, and she was the only artist in their pool who was available, and she used colored pencils. And it's really, I've had a number of people tell me that their 5-year-old drew better dragons than she did. So I have not reprinted that one yet, but I'm very much looking forward to having a different cover on it. And the Merlin books were done by Gordon Crabb.
Mhm.
And I licensed them for a while after I moved them to Bookview Cafe, and then decided they were outdated. They're beautiful covers, but they are outdated. And so again, Maya Bonhoff did that. And actually, this cover, Guardian of the Trust,
Mhm.
you see she's carrying a staff with a Celtic cross on top?
Mhm.
That was nowhere in the book.
Mm.
And Sheila Gilbert, my editor from Dawn, called me up and said, you have to add that staff. It makes the cover. We
Mhm.
have to see, So I added the staff, and then I had King John burn it.
Okay, express your feelings, Phil.
Yeah. But anyway, so I didn't have to carry it through the book. I just had to make a few references at the beginning.
Mhm.
So rather than completely rewrite the book around that staff. But, but actually by the time we get to Guardian of the Vision, the first of the Elizabethan books, I began designing the book, the covers. Sheila called me up and said, pick 3 scenes, describe them, right down to the clothes and the hair and the eye color kind of a thing. Because she didn't have time to do that. So I did.
Mhm.
And basically from then on, I did the same thing for all my covers with them. I picked a scene, and some of you know Heather Alexander, who is now Alexander James Adams.
Yes.
Mhm.
When I had to design this cover, I put on one of her albums for inspiration.
Oh.
And it came down to one of the hunting songs. And
Mhm.
that's it.
That's very cool.
So we have the fairies and the with their wild hunt. We have the wolfhound familiar, and we have my defrocked priest.
Mhm.
who's strange. I don't know who was the model for that, but he does look a lot like my middle brother, Jim. So, and I've had other cousins tell me that this could have been a young me as Ren.
Mm-hmm.
And it was supposed to be Sean Connery, but it came out looking like James Brolin. But really, I didn't have a lot of control over my covers. But then I started doing DAW, and we get things like this.
Mm-hmm.
This is Family Bedrock. It's a spin-off from the test books. And it's
This
really
is the new one, right?
This is the newest one. I
Number
got my
50.
copies the day after Oricon. But it's really an homage to the con culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I owe a lot of my success to the cons, Oricon in particular, but also Norwest Con and BayCon, which I have done regularly, and several World Cons and World Fantasy Con. That's a different culture. But, you suddenly start orienting your plans for the year around cons.
Mm-hmm.
And I meet fans there. I make new readers there because they come to my readings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might have been my first Oricon, which was my first con ever. And I only had copies of, like 5 copies of my books that Sheila had overnighted to me to take to the con because it was like the week before the book was going to be available. And man in town with same last name, Radford, said, that's not a common name in the Pacific Northwest. And he didn't know me, obviously, because it was my first book, my first con. So he came to my reading. We're cousins.
Oh my God.
It's many generations removed, but we trace our family lineage back to Virginia, around the time of the Revolution.
There is a town in Virginia, Radford,
Yes, and my brother, what is it? Lieutenant Colonel James H. Radford, PhD, retired U.S. Army, was a professor of poli-sci there for a while.
Wow.
And actually, how that came about was that his wife was a sociologist, and she was interviewing for the job of dean at the university in Radford. And not once during the interview did she mention that she was married to a Radford. But she got the job anyway. And so he made a big deal out of it but he's fully retired now. And so no longer living in that particular town. So yes, I know about Radford, Virginia. So yeah. What else? I've just about what do you want to know about?
Actually, Brenda, I'm curious, and I think the audience probably is. Tell us how your relationship with Bob evolved. When I think of fairies and dragons, I don't immediately think of Bob. So tell us how you started writing for B Cubed.
Okay, I don't remember if it was 2003 or 2004. I was guest of honor at RadCon. There in Tri-Cities, Washington. And he drove me to the high school to do a writing workshop on like the Friday morning before the con started at noon. And he took me to breakfast beforehand, and we were almost late because we couldn't stop talking about history and all kinds of things. And so we kind of got to know each other. And then at the dead dog party on Sunday evening, they had ordered Chinese food for whoever was still around for the dead dog party. And things got a little late. and the hot tub was turned up a little too high. And we were sitting around in the hot tub discussing adding spirituality to fiction. There's about 10 of us, I think. And my blood sugar dropped to nothing.
Oh,
And Bob was early stage diabetic as well. He poured a can of Coke down my throat, literally carried me back to my room and sat with me until I stabilized. And he was a budding writer at that time, but had not had time to have any of his work submitted to the writer's workshop, of which I was part of as GOH. So after I got home, I offered to critique a story for him. And one thing led to another. We began critiquing back and forth. My best friend in the world at this point in life. And then back the day after Trump's inauguration, he called me up. Yeah. And he called me up. He says, I've got this great idea for an anthology and alternative truths. And he gives me, what great things we do and the great writers. Since I knew all the writers, the great ones we could tap. And I kept saying, Bob, that's a wonderful idea. What's the catch? He said, oh, you're going to edit it for me. And on and on. And Bob,
there you are.
Catch. And he finally, and I semi-agreed because I was into the idea. And he said, finally, well, we're going to get it out by day 100.
Okay.
That was the other shoe dropping. People who don't know publishing think it just goes on, just happens, and it doesn't. I think we had maybe 80 or 90 submissions, and we took 25 or something, 24, 25. And at the end, we were throwing 3x5 cards at each other. But he lives 200 miles away. And so it was telephone. It was before the days of Zoom. So it was telephone. And I think we met at the McDonald's in Hood River as of the halfway point. Towards the end of it. But we got it out. It was out on day 98. And we learned a lot. But we got it out there. And it
was very, very popular on Amazon.
Yes, it hit number one on several lists. But that's because we were the first of the political satire books that came out, because it takes more than 98 days to put an anthology together.
Yes.
And one of the stories was that we had a lovely little story by Vicki Mitchell, and we had a very similar story by Bruno Lombardi. They were almost identical word counts and very similar themes. We were down to choosing the last story, and we decided, let's go with Vicki. She's a known quantity. We know her work. We know her work ethic, and her reliability. Sorry, Bruno, we loved it, but then things came down to the contract didn't come back, and we bugged her. We finally sent Jim Glass, who lived in the same town, to her house to find out why we couldn't get that contract out of her. She was dead at her desk with the computer. When they revived the computer, it was open to our story.
Oh my God.
She'd had a heart attack.
I've never heard this story. My God, Phil.
Oh my God.
What do we do?
She died in the traces.
So, while we're mourning for Vicki, Bob called Bruno actually called him rather than emailed him. He says, "Have you sold that story again?" Yeah. Could we have it?
Yeah, you have an ironclad excuse,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
So
not like you changed your minds.
yeah, and we were open with him, and he has become a standard for Big Cubed anthologies.
He's wonderful.
Wonderful writer. I don't
Right.
know if this was his first sale, but it was early in his career, and he's gone on to write many, many wonderful stories since then. Bob knows how to pick them.
Phil,
I had never heard that story before,
No.
and that is impressive.
Yeah.
speaking of wonderful stories, Phil, do you have a character that you're particularly fond of, who just a character who you enjoy going into a story with that character?
Oh, I mean, they all have. Every book is my favorite book for a different reason, But as far as characters go, I and several others fell in love with Griffin Kirkwood in Guardian of the Vision. Early Elizabethan period. He's the heir of a small holding on the border country between England and Scotland. And he's conflicted because what he really wants out of life is to be a priest. And this was right at the transition between, I think we started at the death of Edward the Seventh, or Edward the Sixth, Henry VIII's son, who was a very staunch and adamant Protestant. And then there was a brief kerfuffle. He had named Lady Jane Grey as his heir because she was Protestant and she was a first cousin. So she was in line. And there were many, many, many reasons why Mary, his half sister, was not acceptable to the entire population of Britain. There was a kerfuffle. Mary becomes queen, and all of a sudden, Britain is Catholic again. And then 5 years later, Elizabeth becomes queen, and she's basically Protestant. She walked a very fine line of being one or the other, but never, both at the same time, whatever, until she managed to survive. But anyway, Griffin realizes that all of a sudden, just because we've changed monarchs does not mean we have to change our faith. Our faith is intrinsic. It is not part of the monarchy. And so the Catholic Church in France kind of defrocks him at that point. And he becomes an itinerant priest in Britain, ministering to the small folk, the Romany, the people who have no political say, but they have faith. And he's a priest, but he falls in love with a woman who is possessed by a demon.
Whoa.
And that gave me my second three hanky tearjerker ending.
Hijinks ensue.
Wow.
So I think he's the one I fell in love with because he was so conflicted. I even gave him the stigmata.
Oh my God.
He was kind of hermiting at Santiago de Compostela. And I gave him the stigmata, and he said, well, that means I got to go home. But yeah, he's the one that just tugs at my heart.
I can see why. That's really beautiful.
Yeah. And there are heroines galore that I love, and they tend to be a lot more kick-ass than I am. So I can admire them, but I don't truly love them like I do Griffin. So, And mostly I do write from the female point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you a little bit about mysteries.
Okay.
I was long before I ever started dealing with science fiction, I reviewed hundreds of mysteries for January magazine. And I was actually in the process of writing a book about mysteries that take place in Oregon and Washington when I completely changed careers. That was why I asked you when the Whistling River had been published.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
what I want to ask you is writing mysteries nowadays has really been affected by technology, people using cell phones for everything. It really
Yeah.
changes the timing. Are your mysteries set in the present, or have you set them back a little to avoid that?
They are set in the present. Okay. So we're 10 years past the first writing of the first one. I updated it when I redid it for Bookview Cafe. And we have very iffy cell phone connections here on the
Right.
mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Some servers work better than others, it's not supposed to work this way, but everybody goes online at the same time in the morning.
And it
I can't get a
crashes.
cell signal. you know, um, just ask Bob how many times I've had to hang up on phone calls and calling back on the landline. Um, but so it's easy to fudge the technology on those books. And primarily because Glenna, the heroine, is constantly hitting the weather app on her tablet. Because, being a resort, she does a lot of business outdoors. They have a lot of events outdoors. Second one, Whistle While You Plow, is a steam tractor pull. So she can clear some acreage to expand the golf course. And she gets these for free. She gets these steam tractors in to pull the stumps.
Wow.
And, and that's got to be outdoors, And then we did a Highland Games in June, which is really borderline weather
Yes.
on the mountain. And I get more snow than Portland, but we rarely get snowed in, about 1,400 feet elevation. And so anything out of doors is governed by what's going on outside the windows. And the local saying is, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Don't like the forecast, change the channel.
Do you find that your close observation of the weather on the mountain goes into your fantasy as well, where weather really becomes a character in your stories?
Oh yeah. We're weather geeks. We follow, four different weather forecasts every evening on the news.
Whoa.
National. Every morning I check the National Weather Service to see how I should dress for the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because even in June I'm wearing wool. And we had some days in October when I dug out my short sleeve shirts again. So, it's a way of life. And in the fantasies, when they're not locked in castles, they're usually wandering the country. Of course, the weather affects them.
I was about to ask you about hobbies that you pursue, in when you're not writing, but then I realized you've written about one of your hobbies, which is cooking, and food is enormously important in a lot of your books.
I don't cook anymore, though.
And lace.
No?
And lace and dance. There's a
And
lot.
dance. I've done, and the tractor pulls,
Right.
the Highland Games,
Mhm.
ghost hunting, a little bit of all the hobbies we've pursued over the years. I have been able to shove into a mystery some way. And I kind of did that deliberately when Tim was into glass blowing. And
Mhm.
we found every glass blower, God, within a 300-mile range. And we never actually did it, but Tim has read multiple. He could get a master's degree on glassblowing just from the books he read. So I'm going to have to do that in a mystery.
Mhm.
I've been to numerous tractor pulls, many of them featuring steam tractors. And, that's another write-off to go to the big steam up in last weekend in July, first weekend in August in Brooks, Oregon. And take the guys that are fiddling with their tractors and say, I've got this terrain. What's the best tractor for it? And so it's great fun. It fuels our hobby of wandering, taking day trips around Oregon. And Family Bedrock, I got to do a beach con where I love walking the Oregon beaches. And now that I'm almost 18 months past my hip replacement surgery, I can walk the beaches again. After almost 3 years of watching the waves from the hotel window.
Oh.
So, which is fun too, especially when there's a storm that knocks the power out of the hotel and you can see, you're at cloud level and you can see the mist swirling right in front of your window. So yeah, everything wanders in some way or another. There's a very little known book I did for Bookview Cafe. I think it's going to be on special middle of the month for a month. It's called Trance Dancer. Actually, that was the intended series. It's Trickster's Dance is the actual book. Hang on just a second. It's got a fab cover that I'll show you.
She can do this forever, She's got so many books.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you have 50,
Okay.
you got
I'm having trouble laying my hands on the book at the moment, but I know it's somewhere in this pile of 50 books. But it's got a raven in flames on the cover. It's post-apocalyptic. I had started out with a vampire and werewolf paranormal mystery, and that I didn't need vampires and werewolves. I had this post-apocalyptic where suddenly paranormal people are tools for survival. And my heroine dances herself into total exhaustion and then has visions. And if you've ever done or thought about doing an ecstatic dance, it is a spiritual experience that's beyond explanation. So that's why it's on special at Bookview Cafe next month.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, starting whenever the newsletter comes out, mid-month.
Mid-month, yeah.
Yeah.
So it should just be coming out in, a week or so.
Yeah. Cheryl Alexander says, Dick Francis was excellent at weaving in different aspects of other crafts and businesses in relation to horse racing. He used his expertise.
You remember that J.R.R. Tolkien said that we put the love, all that we love, into all that we make.
Yes. And I'm working on it. It's just taking, 30 years and 50 books, and I'm still working on it.
No, you aren't done yet. Are you going to shoot for 60?
I don't know.
It'll take you maybe 3 years, 4 at the most.
Let's go for 5.
Yeah, but you could do this.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm seeing comments, and Bob is saying, wind it up, wind it up.
No. Okay. I'm actually, I wanted to see if Bob was going to wind us up here, or if he has wandered off and is chasing the cat or something. We can keep on going indefinitely. There are a lot more books we haven't even touched on.
Exactly. When you have 50, you could do this all day.
Yeah. I have talked about most of them. There's a couple of single titles.
You might as well talk about one. Which one do you like the best?
Oh, Frozen in Amber.
Show. Oh, there you go.
This one I have
Oh.
reviewed. It's
Mhm.
ready for a proofreader for republication.
Is it a fantasy? Looks
It's a
like
contemporary fantasy. Amber, my heroine, is a Northwest mountain lion, and she's a reluctant one. She deliberately becomes a vegetarian. She only changes 3-4 times a year when she absolutely has to. And she goes into a cell in the Shanghai tunnels beneath downtown Portland with a locked door and a half a cow when she
oh,
can't.
very good.
Um, and it's set in Portland. And she's a lawyer. She's part of the Ware community, but she's reluctant. Okay, and anyway, I think we have hit the 10 o'clock mark.
I think I see Bob rolling around here.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this has been such a great retrospective of a long and crazy career here. It's
Mhm.
great.
And I think you've provided a lot of inspiration for other writers, certainly for me.
Yeah, I clearly have to get on up there. And if you can do 2 books a year, you can really rack this sucker
Oh,
up.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I think she could easily get another 10 books up in 5 years. And so
I'm
that's
working on it.
very nice.
Well, like who oh, my mind just but anyway, during the last 2.5 almost 3 years, I'm glad I had the DAW books to re-edit and reissue, because I was immobilized by the bad hip, and I had both cataracts done and then the hip replacement all within 6 months. And the anesthesia fried my brain. But now I'm back and I'm writing new books.
And the whole thing, the rest of the world has not been that supportive of writers. It's very destructive, the political stuff very stressful. So it's good to have something to go back to.
Yeah. And I'm gonna beg all of our participants off on the comment side, if you have enjoyed any one of my books, please leave a review somewhere.
That's all authors adore reviews,
Yes.
In fact, they don't even have to be 4-star reviews. It could be a 2-star review. You could point out that you really dislike the cover. Her wand annoys you, but that's okay. We want that.
Yeah. Okay. So Bob is back. It's after 10, and my phone is going crazy with messages.
Well, I'm back, but I just wanted to say it as I've worked with Irene for a long time, and
the stories we have told about you already.
Oh, I heard them all. Fun. She was mostly accurate. She didn't tell the one where I had breakfast with Tony Weisskopf.
Oh,
but that's another story altogether. That'll be Irene Radford and the Adventures of Irene and Bob, book 2. But the result was we had a nice book from that. So anyway, it has been Irene Radford. You are just one of my favorite authors to have on board, and a great editor to work with. And you have your own editorial service too, do you not?
Yes. I haven't been doing much of it, because of the invalidism of the last 2 years. But you can find Radford Editorial on Facebook. I have my own page. You can message me or through Facebook. And at the moment, I have my evenings pretty much clear to work on other people's work.
So just remember, the writers that you love and know and love, they're also people. They're out there, they're accessible, they're reach-outable too. And just,
That was my phone telling me all of the messages on Facebook that have come up.
Well, that is cool. So now I will remind you that Karen and I just put out the Southern Truths.
Mhm.
Uh,
Oh, cover. Woohoo, woohoo, woohoo. Excellent.
it is a beautiful cover. I love that cover.
Good.
That's probably, I've gotten more compliments on that cover than any cover ever since the Snowflake cover. Wait, more comments on it. Yeah.
Mhm.
I got a lot of comments on Alternative Truths cover. Not all of them good. But the joy of it is it's a great book.
Mhm.
We tried to take our blinders off. So many people got their blinders on when they look at the South and they think about peach cobbler and pecan pie. It's
Hoop
also,
skirts, gloves, and hats. Oh, bonnets. Excuse me,
yeah,
bonnets.
yeah. It also brought us the Slavers' Rebellion and a few other things that we best not be forgetting.
Mhm.
Uh, so that said, thank you all for coming, and I hope that if you've enjoyed the podcast, you'll tune in Tuesday night when Karen and I, along with Cliff
Winnig.
Winnig and Jim Wright and Alan Jen Shapiro. I think Tom might be there, and Adam Troy Castro, and a few people we're still working with to guide you through the election night. Because I can tell you what, I am guaranteed to survive election night.
Oh, look at that.
What?
Just
What?
what you need. Can you tell us-
The label's too pale.
This
It
is
looks
Wood.
good. It,
Wood.
it it looks like it's high proof. That's what you need.
yeah. And if that doesn't hold me through, I've still got half a bottle of rye whiskey left over from the 2016 election.
Yeah,
Okay.
Barbro, yes, it's Tuesday night, I think from 6 to 10 Pacific time.
6:30.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by that time, you'll have a lot of the results from the East Coast. So it's not going to be one of those, pounding suspenseful things.
Yeah, and also we have a few writers. Maybe a couple people might read some stuff for us. We will have Jim Wright. Jim Wright gets off on a good rant.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want to interrupt him. He can go for 30, 40 minutes without taking a breath.
Yeah.
Yep, that's endlessly entertaining.
I'll
And
stop.
Bob made me promise I'd at least drop in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah, because you've got a certain bit of Southern cred to you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I lived in Virginia for 5 years.
Now,
And I'm told I had an accent when I first moved out back to Oregon.
when I got into the Navy, when I joined the Navy, there were people in the Navy that swore they could not understand a word I said. And now, my accent has also virtually disappeared since then, but it.
Unless he's talking to his sister, and then it's thick.
Mhm.
But
Okay,
he never learned to drink coffee until after he joined the Navy. And so his accent for the word coffee is very much Northeast.
Well, actually, the woman who introduced me to coffee was from Massachusetts. She was from the Maine, the hometown Braintree.
Oh, Braintree, yeah.
Yeah, she was. That's where she was, and the most fun about her was when my uncle brought her home to meet the family. Here she was, this timid, redheaded woman from Braintree, Massachusetts, all of a sudden dumped into the middle of a giant Texas family where her husband's still going through a couple deployments. And one time he had to send her to the store to get spark plugs. And my other aunt found her standing at the counter crying because she knew that people were messing with her, because she could see the spark plugs right up there on the shelf, And the guys was telling her that they didn't have no spark plugs and they didn't know what the hell she was talking about. And she just knew they was making fun of her because she is from the North. Because this was back when they called you Yankee, it wasn't a joke.
And it wasn't a compliment.
Yeah, that's it. But anyway, we'll see you guys Tuesday night. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody. And I'm gonna